What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shaped their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community, I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's special edition episode is best-selling author Simon Sinek. He has devoted his professional life to helping people wake up every morning inspired, feel safe wherever they are, and end the day fulfilled by the work that they do. He is best known for popularizing the concept of knowing your why, which he described in his first TED Talk way back in 2009. That talk went on to become the second most watched TED Talk of all time. Years later, his interview on millennials in the workplace broke the internet with more than 80 million views in its first week. This made Simon the fifth most searched term on YouTube that year. Today, I have the privilege of working alongside Simon's team, teaching a workshop in his virtual classroom on how to use storytelling to make a greater impact. In light of this partnership, I am excited to welcome one of the world's great visionaries to our podcast.
Finite mindset is obsessed with winning, and the infinite mindset is obsessed with constant improvement and understands that there's no such thing as winning business. It doesn't exist because there's no agreed upon metrics. There's no standardized rules on how you do business. Problem is you listen to so many leaders and they talk about being number one, being the best, and beating their competition. Based on what? A finite-minded player fears surprise. And as a result, all thinking is done in the past. To the infinite-minded, it's the total opposite. Thinking begins at the moment of surprise, and they love surprise because they view opportunity in uncertainty. And the thinking begins now.
Simon, thanks for joining us.
It's really nice to be here. Thanks for having me, Don.
Awesome. Let's travel back to your childhood. I saw that by the time you were 10 years old, you'd already lived on 4 continents, right? North America, Europe, Africa, Asia. And universally, sports is that magnet which often draws communities together. It even helps people blend together. I'm just wondering, did athletics play a role in your childhood when your environment was constantly changing? I mean, you're in new neighborhoods, new friends. Tell me about childhood sports.
Well, I remember distinctly when I lived in Hong Kong that my parents sent me to the American school to play baseball. And so I was on a baseball team with a lot of the American kids. And so it absolutely helped sort of like broaden my horizons and meet people who went to the English school. It was a treat to meet people who didn't sound like me.
And in all of that, were there sports that you gravitated to? Were there things you began to enjoy?
I have sort of done a little bit of a bunch of things. I've always loved, like in college, I played intramural softball, which I always loved. I was always a very fast runner, and I was always good at anything that involved a burst. Anything sustainable was no good, but anything to do with a burst, I was actually pretty good. So I played tennis, I played racquetball all through high school, squash all through college. I liked that kind of thing. I was a sprinter. I mean, as a kid, when I got to America, I became a baseball fan really quickly, and I became a Mets fan
A Mets fan.
from the early days.
Man, that's rough.
Well, it was rough, except for the fact that I got to go to the 7th game of the '86 World Series when Jesse Orosco threw his glove into the air. My friend, her and her dad were big Mets fans. They had season tickets, so they got tickets to the World Series, and they brought me. And we were in the last seats in the last row of the stadium. Literally, if we turned our backs, we just saw like the parking lot from 1,000 feet up. But what an amazing energy. I remember that to this day.
Oh man, that's awesome. Well, World Series, those are incredibly special moments. As you said, athletics was always something you've enjoyed participating as much more than watching. And I know that in 2017 you biked across Morocco for 2 days, then you hiked for 2 days as part of this Virgin Strive Challenge,
Yeah.
doing some work in the education system there. I'm intrigued by that intersection of community, sport, philanthropy.
Yeah. So the Virgin Group has many charities. One of them is called Big Change. Big Change is invested in education reform. They do these Strive events where a small group, there's like 25 people, go on these athletic challenges that you have to train for because they're pretty grueling. And some of them are short and some of them are very, very long. They actually have ones that go for an entire month. People come either for different stages or some crazy people do the whole thing. And this was a 4 or 5 day bike and hike into the Atlas Mountains. And we ended up hiking up a mountain at one point. So there was lots of biking and lots of hiking. It was pretty magical because we would camp in the evening and that was all community. And there we would talk about the subject matter at hand, but we'd also literally sit around the fire and get to know each other. And I made some really, really good friends on that trip, which was really, really special.
Was it the pushing of yourself physically, or was it the opportunity to do something unique in changing the world that drew you most to that opportunity?
I think it's both. I like the idea of a challenge and I like the idea of doing a challenge with others. Because as you know, one of the great things about these kinds of events is you cheer each other on. Some people are very, very strong and some people are not as strong. And yet it doesn't matter. We're all in it together and we all cheer each other on. We love the strong ones. We hail them at how well they do. And then somebody's going to always hang back with you if you fall back. I really, really appreciated that. And then to know that you're doing it for a good cause, it's not just for giggles, I think it adds a level of purpose to it.
I find it so powerful that you use the for impact phrase and not the not for profit phrase.
Right. I hate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not for profit is a tax delineation. You know, nobody wants to do something not for something. How would you like to wake up in the morning? Is like, my work is not for profit. You want to do something for something. And anybody who gets into a charitable space isn't doing it not for profit, they're doing it for impact. And I strongly encourage anyone in the charitable space to stop calling themselves not for profit. That's your tax delineation, and start calling yourself a for impact organization. I work for a for impact organization. And by the way, we are profitable. We just define profit in terms of our impact, not in terms of dollars and cents.
And who we change. Exactly. And how we change. Your TED Talk, which was my first introduction to you about how great leaders inspire action, 2009. Hard to believe that it was that long ago. Third most watched TED Talk of all time.
I'm gray
You're great now. That's right. Back then, it's so much younger
now.
looking. Subtitled in 47 languages now. That's so amazing. In that, you explain the why of what we do and how it should be at the center of purpose and reason. And now, phraseology is a concept that's known worldwide. I've acknowledged that I'm a longtime follower of your work, but there might actually be one or two people who might be listening to this who don't fully know how you grew to develop your start with why process. Can you tell us the development of that idea in a way that can help listeners understand how you took this from an idea to a global impact?
Well, it's a deeply personal story. It was never a commercial or academic exercise.
That's what's beautiful.
I mean, it was born out of the loss of my own passion for the work that I was doing. And people gave me stupid advice. Do what you love. Like, what am I like? I'm doing the same thing. I don't love it anymore. Like, what am I supposed to do with that advice? Find your bliss. Thank you. It was a dark time because superficially things were fine. I had my own business. We had great clients. We did good work. I made an okay living. Like, things were fine. And so I was very embarrassed by the fact that I didn't want to do it every day. I didn't want to do it anymore. So I kept it to myself. I was lying, hiding, and faking every day. I was pretending that I was happier, more successful, and more in control than I actually felt. And it wasn't until a dear friend of mine said to me, something's different, something's wrong.
Mm.
And I came clean and it lifted a weight off my shoulders. And for the first time, all of that energy that went into lying, hiding, and faking could go into finding a solution. And the solution that I found was this naturally occurring pattern based on the biology of human decision making that I called the golden circle. Every single one of us knows what we do. So did I. I could tell you how I was different or special or stood out from those who did the same thing as I did, but I couldn't tell you why I was doing it. And I realized the reason for the loss of my passion was I didn't know why I was getting out of bed every morning. And so I became obsessed with finding an answer to that question. I learned that answer. And more important, I learned how to help others find that answer for themselves. I shared it with my friends. My friends invited me to share it with their friends. I would literally stand in someone's living room in New York City with a bunch of people sitting on the floor of the living room. And I would talk about this thing called the why. And I'd help people find their why for $100 on the side. And it wasn't supposed to be anything more than just that. But people kept inviting me to talk about it. And I just kept saying yes. And because it was so deeply personal, and I think it resonated with a lot of other people, I think it just spread organically.
It's such a simple yet powerful concept. One of the things that really stood out to me as I studied it, and I began asking leaders, coaches, others about how they applied that concept into some of the work that they do. And one of the most powerful examples was with basketball coach named Mike Krzyzewski. He leads the Duke men's basketball team and the USA men's national basketball team. And he started talking about how he wanted to create what he calls feel it moments, right? Where you feel who you serve. It's his version of why. And to get superstar basketball players to feel who you serve in the eve of the 2012 Olympic Games, he took the team to Arlington National Cemetery because he wanted them to feel what it meant to wear the letters USA on their jersey. It all really harkens back to your work and what they learned and what many of us learned from this concept of your why. Did you have any idea when you were just trying to find your place and your why that you might have this kind of impact?
Of course not. I mean, I think you give me too much credit. I think Coach understood the value of service. One of the things that my work has done is it's given words to people who innately sense it, but have been struggling to explain it. And I get that compliment a lot. It's one of the greatest compliments someone can pay me. They come up to me and say, I've been trying to say this for years, and finally I can communicate what's been stuck in my head. One of the things that people come to discover is purpose and cause and belief. Why is service oriented? Why is not self-serving? And people say, my why is to be the best. That's not what a why is. It's always in service. I had the opportunity to work out with some of the officers from the 82nd Airborne. We went out early in the morning and we were doing push-ups in the parking lot on the gravel. My hands are all like, don't do push-ups on gravel. It's just not fun. Sort of like half an hour. It was like I was like, great workout, guys. Apparently that was the warm-up. So we went out to the field where there was a little sort of course that we did that day, just by coincidence, the day I happened to work out with them. We did something called a hero's workout. They took out a piece of paper and told us about, in this case, a fallen airman. So it wasn't even from their own service. I'm with the Army. This is an airman, a fallen airman who was killed in combat. They told us his name. They told us how he died. They told us where he was from. They told us the name of his kids. They told us the name of his wife. They told us the name of his parents. They told us where he grew up. And they said, today we're working out for him. And it had a profound impact. I remember there were moments that I was dragging and I thought, today is for him. And all of a sudden I found energy that I didn't know I had. On any other day, I would have been like, it's okay, Simon, take it easy. You know, None of us wanted to take it easy because we weren't working out for ourselves. I remember the intense camaraderie working out with the Army. They're a bunch of A-type, highly competitive guys that I was working out with, and you would think they would be competitive against each other, but they weren't. They were definitely competitive with themselves, and some of them wanted to come out first, but it's not because they wanted to beat the others. In fact, quite the opposite. There were times where someone would run past me and they'd give me a pat on the shoulder and be like, come on, pick it up. Even though we were all competitive, we were all encouraging and cheering each other on. The energy of doing this hero's workout, to be in service, even when we were working out, was profound, was profound. Now imagine applying that mentality to our work, to our friendships, to our relationships. It's powerful stuff.
That hero's workout is so powerful because, again, you put a family of faces on someone for whom that day you are going to give extraordinary effort, and you find a different gear. You've got something just a little deeper where you can dig and give.
Yeah, and I've learned this from the Marine Corps as well. The Marines are constantly telling stories about the heralded past because they understand that you make a better organization, you make a stronger culture, and you make better long-term decisions, not when you think about the amorphous future, but you think about the past, where you say, we do not want to let the sacrifice of those who came before us go in vain. You work hard today to uphold and make sure that their sacrifice was worth it. It adds a sense of intensity to the work that we do. And there's been some research on this with families as well, that kids who know, like, even where their grandparents come from, outperform kids who have no sense of their own history, because you have a sense of legacy that you have to uphold. Don't let your family name down. You live up to your family name. You live up to the sacrifices of those who came before you. You make the sacrifices worth it. To have a sense of history in the past, which is all storytelling,
Mhm.
has profound impact on how we live our lives and build the future.
No question. I know how much you value the United States military service. I've read about your passion for the soldiers, and I understand it even took you to the middle of a ground battle to Afghanistan
Well, I went with the Air Force.
with the Air Force.
I was a guest of the Air Mobility Command, who are the people who fly all the tankers and the cargo planes.
Yeah.
Air Force One as well. They're responsible for that. I was doing work with AMC at the time, and the commander said, Simon, you've got to know us, but it would mean a lot to us if you got to see our men and women actually perform their duty. Would you be willing to go to Iraq or Afghanistan?" And I said, yes.
Mm.
I went to Bagram Air Base, Afghanistan, and had the opportunity to fly on an airdrop mission. We were dropping cargo, like fuel and water and ammunition, down to a forward operating base. So we took a C-17
Right.
out to the forward operating base, dropped down to 2,000 feet, and the cargo flew out with parachutes out the back.
Yeah.
It was amazing. What made that trip profound was not that. That was exciting. But what made the trip profound is that most things went wrong on that trip. We landed in the middle of the night and we were still on the aircraft. We hadn't even got off the aircraft, and the base came under rocket attack.
Mm.
3 rockets hit 100 yards off our nose.
Mm.
We heard them come in. For people who've been in a war zone, I think they'll know this. You have all of the feelings you would expect to have, but you don't necessarily have them at the right times. So when we were under rocket attack, I was weirdly relaxed because everybody else was relaxed. Like I've never been in a war zone before. I should have been panicking. The panic came later. I remember we were getting ready to come home, and the flight that we were supposed to come home on, all of the flights are at the discretion of the pilot. We just try and jump on a plane that's going in our direction. That's kind of how it works. And the flight that we were trying to get on, at the last minute, they bumped us because they needed more room for stretchers to bring wounded warriors home.
Mm.
There's ever a good reason to get bumped off a plane. This is it.
That's it.
But then we discovered that there were no other flights leaving for the next 4 days. And I didn't tell my parents that I was going to Afghanistan because I didn't want to worry them. I told them I was going away with the Air Force. True. I told them I was going to Germany. True. I just didn't tell them I was going from Germany to Afghanistan.
Right.
What am I going to do? I can't call them. And even I did call them. What am I going to do? Hey, I'm in Afghanistan.
Right.
I can't call them. They won't hear from me. They know what day I'm supposed to get back. I'm only supposed to be gone a few days. All of a sudden, the panic settled in. And I became convinced it was going to be another rocket attack. And I was convinced that the next rocket was going to land on me. It was the most intense thing. We went and tried to get a little sleep because we hadn't slept much. I lay there in the dark. One of the officers who was with me, he went to the gym, and the other one went to see if he could find another flight. And I just lay in the dark by myself. I remember just the regret, the panic, the total madness that was going on in my head. And I'm in the purpose business. So I thought, okay, Simon, the reason you're panicking is because you don't have any purpose. You don't have a reason for being here. You need to come up with one. And so I would make one up. You're here to tell their story, and it would make me feel good for like 2 minutes, and then my panic would come back. Lying in that bed by myself, I finally gave up. I resigned. And I just accepted that I was stuck here. And if I was going to be stuck here, I might as well make myself useful. I would volunteer. I would carry boxes. I would sweep floors. Anything they needed, I would speak if they wanted me to. Like whatever they wanted, I wanted to help. I wanted to serve those who served others. And the minute I came to that conclusion, to serve those who serve others, this amazing calm came over me.
Mm-hmm.
It was more than a calm. It was actually an excitement. I was actually ready to be there because now my life and my reason for being there had purpose, and the purpose was to serve other human beings directly. It was like it was a movie, though. The timing was uncanny. Just as I'd come to this conclusion of this amazing calm, the door flung open. The captain I was with, Throckmorton, he's like, I found a flight, but it's leaving. We've got to go now. If we don't get on the plane, it's going to go without us. We got to go. Where's Matt? He's at the gym. So we ran to the gym. We got Matt off the treadmill. He didn't have time to shower. He just put his uniform back on. We grabbed all our stuff and we just ran to the flight line. And we could see the C-17 we were going to get on to come back home, but we couldn't get there. They had shut down the flight line because simultaneously there was a fallen soldier ceremony happening on base.
Mm.
And out of respect for the fallen, everything stops while they have that fallen soldier ceremony.
Right.
What I haven't told you is the reason that flight was redirected is that this is the flight that would be carrying home that fallen soldier for whom they were having the ceremony. We would be bringing him home. We boarded this flight with a single flag draped casket strapped to the middle of the cargo bay, only 3 passengers aboard the plane. And for 9.5 hours, we flew to Germany with this casket. I slept right next to him. It was one of the most powerful, profound things I've ever experienced. It changed me. In fact, my book, Leaders Eat Last, was born out of that experience.
Mhm.
Never was I prouder, having just gone through what I went through and learned the true definition of purpose, which is to serve those who serve others. I had the honor of bringing someone home who knows a lot more about service than I ever will. We know who he was. We looked him up. He's from Los Angeles, young guy. We looked up his family. We looked up his name. And I am immensely grateful for that experience. I carry it with me.
Isn't it amazing how those opportunities, unexpected as they are, shape us, change us, and the stories that come with them can change others? I mean, I'm changed because I heard you tell it.
Yeah.
The hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Thank you.
I want to share an addendum as well
Please.
that really underscores one of the reasons why I love folks in uniform. And they're very bad at telling their own story, and they're a very misunderstood culture, as you know. The deal the AMC kind of made with me is once I come back, they wanted me to go back to headquarters a week or two later to report out on what I saw and offer any insights that may help them. Per our deal, I went back and stood in the conference room with all the brass and reported out on some of the things I saw and some of the opportunities and some of the experiences. And I was debating whether I should tell this story about what I experienced bringing home that fallen soldier and the panic experience that I had and learning service. The emotion was still very intense and very raw. I decided I would tell the story, and I really struggled to get through it. I stood on the stage and I started welling up, and I couldn't talk, and I started crying, and I was completely quiet. I couldn't get any words out. And something happened that reinforced their culture. So if this was in the private sector, if I was standing on a stage in a business conference and I started welling up or crying, somebody would say to me, "It's okay. Take your time." That's the kind of thing people would say to you. That's not what happened. I stood there welled up, and the general said, "Go on." And that was
Mm,
the only two words spoken in the room. The underlying message is, "You're safe.
mhm,
We're going with you." In the private sector, when they say, "Take your time, it's okay," what they're saying is, "You're by yourself."
mhm.
Where here they were saying, "Persevere because you're not alone."
We're here.
And I was able to tell the story. I mean, it wells me up right now. I was able to tell the story because I wasn't alone in the telling of that story. And I can tell you, and you know this, you've had this experience. I've cried with more people in uniform than I've ever cried with people in suits. I've sat around tables with various officers and we started telling stories and we've all wept at the dinner table. That's never happened in business.
No.
I've stood in the audience when a general is giving a briefing and cried. And crying is totally fine in the military. That's
Yeah,
what people don't understand. It's totally acceptable.
right.
For all the machismo, crying is not seen as weak.
No,
If anything, it's something that bonds you with somebody else.
because it's a shared experience.
It's a shared experience. And in business, we have colleagues and coworkers. In the military, they have brothers and sisters.
Yep.
Those relationships are real. Those are familial relationships. Just like you may fight with your brother or sister, but if anybody ever threatens your brother or sister, they got to go through you. And it's the same. They may not like each other, but they'll die for each other, just like brothers and sisters.
Yep.
I remember the first time someone called me brother.
Mhm.
As I was developing a friendship, I realized what that meant. And to this day, I have friends, and I'm sure you do too, where we'll pick up the phone and we'll say, "Hey, brother."
Mm,
It's not polite, it's infused with meaning,
mhm.
it's infused with love. I am forever grateful and forever changed because of the opportunities I've had to spend time with these remarkable men and women.
How did that relationship with the military begin for you?
The Air Force were actually early adopters, believe it or not.
Really?
I first articulated the concept of the Golden Circle in January of 2006 publicly.
Mhm.
Within a few weeks, I found myself at a meeting with a one star who was in charge of Air Force public affairs. He had convened a small group of communications experts to come and offer him some informal advice. And one of the people he invited was the director of my program that I taught at Columbia. And I just happened to be on the phone with her, like, "Hey, what are you up to this week?" Like, we were just catching up. And she's like, "Oh, I've got this Air Force meeting." And I was a kid. My grandfather was in the Royal Air Force during the war. I grew up with pictures of F4 Phantoms and SR-71s on my wall. I mean, I was a dorky kid. Like, I'd never had any interaction with the Air Force. And the little kid in me came alive. Like, "You got to get me into that meeting," just because I wanted to be at an Air Force meeting. I just wanted to crash the meeting. So she got me into the meeting. I was there with all these white haired old guys giving very white haired old guy advice. And I sat there and started drawing bullseyes and talking about the concept of why on napkins. And the general was intrigued. And so he invited me to the Pentagon. A couple months later, I found myself at the Pentagon, and he convened a group of people for me to do an exercise with to help talk about and discover the Air Force's why. And there were some people in the room who, quite frankly, didn't want to be there, but they were told to be there. One of those people was Colonel Laurie Robinson, who I met in 2006, who went on to become four-star General Laurie Robinson, the highest ranking female officer in the history of the United States military. There were other people in the room who invited me back that same year, just a few months later, to present the concept as the Golden Circle to the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. In January, it was a brand new idea. By August, I was standing in the Pentagon for the second time presenting to the most senior leaders of the US Air Force. And the Air Force were just early adopters. It's very much part of the Air Force culture. They love shiny objects.
Especially if they fly fast.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was saying something new and different. And they were curious. It was nothing more than that. They didn't think I was right. They didn't think I was wrong. They were just curious. There was no TED Talk. There was no book. That was years away from any TED Talks or books. So my relationship would start off with the Air Force, but then I went on to meet the other branches as well. For as long as I've been talking about the concept of the Golden Circle, the growth of the Golden Circle is simultaneously parallel path with the growth of my relationship with these wonderful human beings. So I've learned a lot from them because if my work has been informed by my relationship with them. And so you'll see that every book I've ever written has at least one, but sometimes multiple military stories.
So what's so awesome about that is that you look at the military, you look at organizations like Make-A-Wish or others that would seem so naturally purpose centered, right? Purpose focused. And yet that ability to come back and ask that question, what is my why? What is our why? It's not just a shiny object.
Right.
It really is an exercise of bringing us back to center.
It's a touchstone. It's
Right.
a touchstone.
You think it's, my gosh, of course, everybody knows what our why is. We're the United States Air Force.
Yeah. Right.
Well, we've long since forgot it because we move on and we get busy crossing T's and dotting I's.
Yeah. Like in business, we
Right.
get wrapped up in the daily details, and sometimes we lose sight of our origin story,
Right.
or it becomes somehow told differently. And that leads to identity crisis, which leads to morale issues or leadership issues or any kinds of things. And don't get me wrong, the military has plenty of problems. They're by no means a perfect organization. But when they get things right, they get things so unbelievably right,
Yeah.
way more profoundly right than most businesses. And the examples of right are in greater supply. And they're an organization that is obsessed with constant improvement. They're very willing, more than businesses, to have very blunt and honest conversations about their failings.
Right.
I've been so profoundly moved by the honesty that you sit in a room and you speak truth to power and they nod their head and you go, you're right.
Mhm.
Business, they love to fight, and they love to debate. I mean, I can tell you the number of times that I used to get heckled, especially in the early days of my work when I was just, giving a talk about the Golden Circle. And some guy raises his hand and says, I think you're naive and I don't think you understand how business really works. And this would never work in the real world. My answer was, so don't do it. Like, what do you want from me? Like, I'm not here to convince you. I'm just here to share an idea. Like, if you don't like it, so don't do it.
Right.
I'm not going to lose any sleep either way. The point is that that's such a business attitude to disagree and then want to fight about it.
Right.
The military, when they disagree, they want to understand more. I get asked much better questions in the military. When I do business conferences, I get asked almost the same question every single time. I've been asked those questions so many times, I know all the answers.
Program 'em. Yeah.
Occasionally I get something new, but it's not often. When I talk to military audiences, I stand on a stage and it's humbling because they'll ask me questions and I'm like, um,
I didn't see that one coming.
yeah. Let me tell you some of the questions I've had. Where does revenge come from?
Whoa.
How do we fight an enemy who's really good at everything you talk about?
Whoa.
They ask me questions that make me think, that I don't know the answers to, which means we have to have a discussion about it so we can work on this problem together. They ask me questions that are not about how we can make more money. They ask me questions about how do we do better at taking care of each other? What do you do when that goes wrong? It's an entirely different mind. It's a service mindset. It's everything we've been talking about. It's a service mindset that drives their questions versus a selfish mindset that drives most business questions.
It's a curious mindset too, which when I look at leadership and when I've had the chance like you to interview and talk to a lot of great leaders, that seems to be that CQ, right? That curiosity quotient, that measurement no one seems to have yet figured out a tool for.
Right.
when I identify those in the military, right, General Robinson and these others, that's power. That's power in play.
Yeah. And the new chief of staff of the Air Force is General CQ Brown. So clearly,
So how do you encourage others to develop that type of trait?
my obsession with the infinite mindset, with the infinite game.
Got the book right here behind me.
Right. So I think one of the things that generates curiosity is an infinite mindset. Finite mindset is obsessed with winning.
Right,
They treat everything as if it's a finite game. They view everything like it's baseball. And the infinite mindset is obsessed with constant improvement and understands that there's no such thing as winning. So there's no such thing as winning business. It doesn't exist, right? Because there's no agreed upon metrics, there's no agreed upon timeframes, there's no standardized rules on how you do business. Every business can run their business however they want.
right,
New players come and go whenever they want. When Circuit City went bankrupt, Best Buy didn't win business. Problem is you listen to so many leaders and they talk about being number one, being the best, and beating their competition. Based on what? And so when you run your business with a finite mindset, when you play to win in a game that has no finish line, there's some predictable and consistent outcomes, amongst which include the decline of trust, cooperation, and innovation. I had the chance to sit down with Dr. James Carse before he died, bless him. He originated the definition of finite infinite games back in the mid 80s. And he explained to me that a finite minded player fears surprise, which is why they try to operate with very short time frames. You see this in business. We work in quarters or a year, but not 5 or 10,
right,
because we can't control the outcome in 5 or 10, but we can control the outcomes in a quarter or a year, right? So we want to work in very short time frames. We want command and control because we want to exert control. And the reason is because we want to mitigate surprise. We want to avoid surprise. And as a result, all thinking is done in the past. You see this in sports and you see this in the military, which are finite. Like traditional war is finite and sports is definitely finite. So athletes practice, 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 and soldiers train and train and train and train and train and train so that they can mitigate surprise, so that they're prepared for every eventuality. And you even hear it in their language. They talk about it. They say, I didn't have to think, my training kicked in.
muscle memory.
Right. I didn't have to think, it was just muscle memory. They actually say no thinking required,
Right,
muscle memory, because all the thinking was done in the past.
right,
Surprise is something very scary to finite minded. You work very hard to avoid surprise. To the infinite minded, it's the total opposite. Thinking begins at the moment of surprise, and they love surprise because they view opportunity in uncertainty. Where finite minded fears uncertainty, infinite minded embraces uncertainty, and the thinking begins now. We saw this happen in COVID. I love, by the way, just as an aside, I thought it was hilarious when people said during these uncertain times. Hello, all times are uncertain. There's never been a time ever that was certain. What happens is we were lulled into a false sense of uncertainty. Something happened we didn't expect that reminded us that time is uncertain.
uncertain, right,
For the finite minded, when COVID happened, the first reaction was panic, because we don't have a plan for this and we don't know what to do. We have never experienced this before. The infinite minded went, whew, we've never done this before. This is entirely new. Right. What are we going to do? The death and the horrors notwithstanding that were surrounding us, from a purely business standpoint, for some, the infinite minded, that experience was actually very invigorating. It's actually very exciting because they got to invent and try and experiment. That doesn't mean it wasn't stressful. There's plenty of stress, but the mindset was embracing uncertainty and the opportunity that exists versus fearing it because we haven't thought about this before. And I think in the military, where their curiosity comes from is in part their infinite mindset. Though they want to win war, which is finite, they know that there's no such thing as winning military.
yep,
Even though we say we want to be the best, we know that there's actually no such thing. And we know that every single moment of every single day, they are in a game of constant improvement, constant refinement, constantly reevaluating, constantly realizing that some things they didn't work and they're going to have to do it differently. Like in business, the concept of planning happens in one of two times. During our annual planning,
2-day event, or
clearly,
yeah,
our annual planning event, so it happens once a year, or when something goes wrong. That's when planning happens in business.
yeah,
In the military, planning is a discipline.
right,
It's constant. You ask somebody, what's your job? They say, I'm in planning, which means all they do every single day is develop plans for things that haven't happened and may never happen. So when something unexpected happens, somebody goes, We gamed this out a while ago. It's not exactly like this, but we could probably use it. And it's constant, 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 constant improvement. It's actually a discipline.
One of my favorite lines from a general, General Bernard Banks, who I was doing some work with, said, you do all this planning, exactly to your point, but the enemy gets a vote too.
Yeah,
Suddenly, all these plans that you had might not.
out the window.
Exactly.
A Marine told me no plan ever survives contact with the enemy.
Right. Yeah. As you said, now comes the infinite mindset.
Right.
What in all that we've done and learned can we shift and adjust to?
Yeah. And I know why planning is not a discipline in business, because it's on the L side of the P&L.
Right.
How do you justify paying someone's salary
To plan.
for something that may never happen and has no particular short-term value to the bottom line on an annualized basis
Right.
until you need it? Planning to me is the same reason you buy insurance. No one expects for their house to burn down, but we all have insurance. Most people will go their entire life and not have to cash in on their insurance policy for their house burning down. The majority of us will never have to use that insurance policy, but we really want to have one.
Absolutely.
And that's the same mentality. And I really wish that businesses would think about planning the same as insurance and invest the money, because it's actually worth it for the time you don't think you need it. And sometimes in between.
Right. Simon, you talked about COVID and infinite mindset and the way people adjusted and the way different people handled themselves in this period. One of the things that you did is you actually began your own podcast, A Bit of Optimism. I love it. It
Oh,
is
you're the best. Thank you.
so awesome. What impact do you hope to have through sharing the stories of these people whose lives brought optimism and joy into yours? What is it that you're hoping through those stories to bring into the lives of those people that you have listened to?
What was really important to me when we started the podcast, because we've been toying around with doing a podcast for a long time, but what am I going to do? Interview the same people that everybody else interviews on their podcast? How many times can you listen to the same people doing the same interview?
Ditto.
And I love talking to people. I learn from people and I'm curious about people. And I'm I'm a bit of a bastard sometimes because I'm like, don't come on and talk to me about your new book. I want to talk about you. I want to talk about how you got here. There was something that you lived in your life that led you to this that I find really interesting.
Yeah.
We called people that there was something I wanted to learn from them that may or may not even be directly related to their work, to be frank.
Hmm.
My very first guests were Will Guidara and Christina Tosi. Will Guidara was the owner of 11 Madison Park, which was at one point the best restaurant in the world.
Absolutely.
And Christina Tosi is the founder and CEO of Milk Bar, famous for cereal, milk, ice cream, and many other wonderful confectionaries.
Right.
They're actually married, and they've never done an interview together. And they're friends of mine. I love them to death. They came on and we talked about friendship. We talked about what friends mean. We didn't talk about the restaurant business. We didn't talk about ice cream. We didn't talk about what desserts. We didn't talk about either of their careers. We talked about how to make friends and what friendship actually means, because that's what I love about them. And I've tried to do that in each of these podcasts. And some of the people you heard of and some people you haven't heard of, but every single one of them either has taught me something or I want to learn something from them. I am richer and wiser because of these magical human beings that have generously given their time to come on the podcast. Quite frankly, it's a little bit selfish. It's a little voyeuristic. I mean, basically what the podcast is people are listening into these very personal conversations that I'm having.
I'm with you.
Because I'm trying to learn. And it's like you're sitting at the table next to us, listening into our conversation kind of thing. But it's been an absolute joy. Thank you for saying so, Don. It's been really a joy.
I have to tell you, so my episode that I loved was your one with Carolyn Adams.
Oh, yeah.
I loved it. And I love this line that she had. It reminded me of basketball coach John Wooden. We wrote a book together. He was so extraordinary.
Lucky you. Lucky you.
So if you want to talk about my book with John Wooden, you let me know. But Carolyn told you when you do something good for something else with no expectation of anything in return, you feel good. It was such a great, I wrote the line down. It was so awesome because Coach Wooden, one of his favorite lines, he had a motto. He actually had it on a plaque in his office. It said, "You cannot live a perfect day without doing something for someone who cannot repay you."
Isn't that the best?
I loved it. When I heard her say that, I thought of Coach Wooden and I thought, extraordinary people. That's the way they live, right?
Yeah.
They live to serve. They live to do it for people who can give them nothing back. And I think of this is where we're all blessed if we get a chance not just to hear those things,
Yeah.
maybe in some way internalize those things. And clearly, you're getting that chance. Simon, you're a gift to all of us. Thanks for igniting our world and making me focus on my purpose. Thank you for joining us and being a corporate competitor on our podcast.
Don, you're the best. And we've known each other a long time and called each other for advice. And every time we've talked, I walk away wiser and definitely more inspired. Today is no exception. Thank you so much for having me on. It's just a joy to talk to you.
What an incredible conversation. In the spirit of his infinite game discussion, I felt like I wanted to keep listening and learning from him for hours. As I mentioned in that discussion, I'm honored to be Simon's teammate in teaching the art of storytelling. We have several sessions coming up in the next few weeks. If you are interested, look at the show notes on episode 34 at corporatecompetitorpodcast.com, and we will connect you to Simon's enrollment page. If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man?
Great, sir. How are
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.